today is one of these days where we have not just any guest, we have a phenomenal special guest. Curtis Cloke, I met you for the first time in New Jersey. We were both there. We met at breakfast. I was eating breakfast with Tom Hegna, and you walked up and you were about to go record a segment with him for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I was there doing the same thing. And so we've kind of followed each other. I've watched you online. You were a teacher in the RICP program, adjunct professor, I guess, if you will. And I saw your videos when I was going through RICP. So phenomenal to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be here, Brad, and I really appreciate you having me on here. So I think we've got a lot of like-mindedness, and It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Well, if you will, just take a couple minutes and tell all of our listeners and our viewers who you are, what you've done, because you've done some pretty incredible stuff. We're going to talk about it today, but tell them about your background.
Well, when I started out in the business, I was 23 years of age, and it was my own financial advisor I've been doing business with since I was about 19, who actually had mentored me. And the reason I got mentored into the business was because I was a farm kid and a gypsum miner, about 630 feet underground loading dynamite when I got injured at 21. I was disabled for 2.5 years, but I had made good money decisions. And the reason I did that was because of the influence of my grandfather. Growing up on the farm, he was anecdotal. He had a lot of opinions and ideas, and he would breed those off on me. So I built my first house, bought my first house at 17, built my first house at 19, debt-free at 21, put two cars together for $500 to have the family car. And I just made some good money decisions. Paid up life insurance before my injury, disability insurance, so I was covered when I was injured. And so my financial advisor, after he had seen me in that state, came to my home and said, you belong in this business. You're a believer in these products. And so after laughing at him and waiting a year, he finally talked me into coming into the business. And so over time, I did a lot of buy-sell agreements and some life insurance. That's kind of what I started out with. And I had one CEO that was what I call the nudger. And that guy believed I could do anything that he would ask me to do. So he led me into employee benefits, and eventually would ask me to do his retirement plan about 1993. And I again laughed at him and said, that's not what I do. And he said, you'll figure it out. And I did. In 1999, I made an interesting discovery of an income product that would change my world. And I think for many folks in the industry, changed many worlds. And that was a delayed income version contract that would allow you to buy income, buy it today and turn it on later with precision, specificity, base you couldn't destroy, one you couldn't outlive, and principle you could not lose. And it sounded too good to be true, but because there was no fee drag, and because of tax differentiations and the ability to lock in some inflation, it was unique and different than doing the traditional laddered bonds. And so I named the product. That product would later have an additional product that was launched in 2014 called the QLAC. And the QLAC would, Garth Bernard, my CEO, who helped bring these products to fruition, actually was the guy that took the idea of the QLAC to the IRS back in 2007. And it became law in 2014. And so two versions of what we now know as a deferred income annuity were kind of our development, and we help many companies develop it. Today, there's many other companies developing those products, and it didn't exist in the form that it does now. Back when we discovered all that came from a disability. One man that believed in me to make a difference. So that's kind of a brief story of my background and how I ended up here.
Well, for those of you listening on the show, for 15 years now, I've been talking about something before it was cool. I've been talking about fixed annuities, income protection, way back when all competitors and other people were saying, oh, you can't even talk about that. That's a 4-letter word. That's bad stuff. Don't ever do it. All these people were paying millions of dollars to have commercials saying, don't ever buy an annuity. They're horrible. They're awful. They keep all your money and all these things. But I've been the one that's been saying, pounding the drum for forever. I've owned them since 2008 myself. And friends, you're listening to someone on the show today who's the GOAT when it comes to this stuff. He helped create it. He's worked in it from the very beginning. And you're going to find out, we're going to talk about in the next segment, but he actually even helped Tom Hegna structure his own annuities. You've heard Tom on the show for years and years. He owns 13 annuities, and our guest on the show today structured those annuities for Tom. We're going to be talking about that. So it's pretty incredible story. You can't find someone with more information and more knowledge and more experience and expertise in this industry than our guest today. So I want to ask you this question. I have more than 2,000 clients. I've structured more than 2,000 annuities. It's kind of crazy. I know, just last month, I structured 31 annuities last month, when most people say, "Oh, no one wants to talk about money in the summer." So I'm writing an annuity almost every single day, multiple annuities on some days. But I want to ask one of the most common questions there is that I get. People will listen to a show, or they'll hear something with Tom when he says he owns 13. I own 8. I'm going to own more. I'm currently structuring my own plan for the future because I'm 54. So I start thinking in terms of 10 years from now and 15 years from now, of course. And so structuring certain income riders and that sort of thing. But our listeners often say this: why in the world would someone own 13 annuities? Why would they own 8 annuities? Why do you need more than one? What would you say to that?
Well, understand that the most optimal way to develop retirement is when you start early. And when you start early, only a portion of your portfolio should be dedicated to irrevocable retirement income. And the other portion needs to be retained for what if, emergencies, opportunities that would be unique. And you should retain some growth. You should retain some assets in the market. And so the most optimal period to plan ahead, and I've only had about a dozen clients do this in my 39-year career, is 20 years. By the way, when you do that, the opportunities for generating great returns on these buckets of annuities is pretty broad. I'll give you an example. I realized when I developed the DIA product back in 1999 that you could get an incremental increase of performance in your internal rate of return for every year that you bought early, up until the 20th year. So there was a diminished value to delay 21 or 22 or 23. And I realized, and through my actuary expert, Garth Bernard, that they basically can't predict money and where money movement's going to go. They can't really provide value beyond that 20 years. So buying it 20 years ahead of time was the greatest IRR for that time, for that schedule of interest rate that was likely to occur. And so I had to get old enough. I was 30 some years of age. I had to get within 20 years of striking distance of my retirement to buy my first one. And so January of 2009, I was 45, and I bought my first bucket was a income bridge from age 65 until age 70, so that in the event that I retired, I could bridge my income without taking Social Security before age 70. That was my first one. Now, the positive consequence to buying, this was a 20-year delay, 5-year period certain. My IRR on that, listed and quoted on the illustration, was 7.24%. Now, understand that was the raw IRR. That also came with a 21% tax exclusion. I know that's a little deep for getting into this podcast, but basically a 21% tax efficiency with no taxes for 20 years, spread out over 5 with the 21 exclusion and no fee drag. So Milliman's took that calculation and they created what would be the equivalent in the market at my tax bracket, and assuming a 1% asset management fee drag if I hired an investment advisor to put that on the market. And if they succeeded 721, what was the gross they would have to provide? The answer was 9.89%. The market would have to deliver to equal the 724 that I got net of fees and with all that tax efficiency. And the reality is, if you go back 100 years and look at 25-year consecutive tranches of time, 20 years of delayed, 5 years of payout, it never's done that, ever. It's never delivered 989. So the reality is, the consequence for me was I beat the market with one of these 4-letter A words, but we need to understand there's 42 types of A words.
Yes.
They're not all the same. That happened to be a deferred period certain bridge. 42 kinds of those. And so
Wow.
you first of all need to know, I wanted to first of all build the bridge, and then I wanted to build the front end. And then as I aged, because I had time, I wanted to build the back end. And so today I have multiple annuities myself. And I won't get into how all the different types that I bought, but basically the reason Tom has 13 is because, first of all, we set up a deferred compensation plan for Tom, a very unique type of structure with an actuary that had been doing this for 50 years. And he knew some of the old rules that some of the new actuaries didn't know, and tax professionals. And so, as he was putting his maximum contribution in his deferred comp, then we were allocating a big chunk of that to another deferred income story. And so he could only do that once a year. So that went on for several years, and that explains maybe 6 or 7 of those 13 contracts. You can only put what you had in the bucket that year, and then next year you put more in the bucket, and then you have to buy another deferred income annuity. And so it had to be owned by the deferred compensation. But there's also different sums of money from a tax class. So that was pre-tax dollars. He was getting a deduction to put the money in there. And then sometimes I've got a big chunk. I've maybe sold a property. I've had a big windfall. I've got some after-tax money that I need to deploy. And of course, I want to deploy those efficiently with tax exclusion treatment. There's timing of when I want to take my qualified assets out versus my non-qualified assets. So there's different tax classes. And so there are multiple reasons why at different times for different timing, I would buy a different structure, a different type of these particular kind of annuity contracts. And that's really the short answer, the broad answer, if you will, why there's 13.
That's so good. I tell people because they ask me, and I always pull my contracts out in front of them. I purchased my first one on May 2nd of 2008. And I just explain, hey, this was an SEP IRA that I did as a rollover from a church I used to work for when I was on staff there. And when I rolled it over, I immediately converted it to a Roth because I'd been listening to Tom and Ed Slott and experts like you. I'm like, okay, get rid of the tax now. So I converted that back when it had $37,000 in it. Now there's over 200 grand in there, all tax free. But I explained to people, one reason is you can't commingle funds. You can't have a Roth held in with an IRA, held in with non-qualified assets. And so if you have different buckets of money, they require a different contract. That's part of it. But then there's also bucket strategies and turning income on at different times, which is something of what you've talked about. Okay, now let's talk about the good old days for a moment. Back in the good old days, you talked about 1999. You helped discover some stuff, was pretty awesome. The formation of ADIA and different, the QLAC, that's awesome, qualified longevity contract. Back in the good old days, it was all the same thing. Stocks and bonds, stocks and bonds, stocks and bonds. That's what you do. You have the stocks for the growth and the risk. You have the bonds there for safety. And then some things happened in our world where we found out that doesn't always work. Like in 2022, when stocks went down about 20% and bonds went down 30%. And so that I call it the teeter-totter, the old ladder we used to play on when we were kids. One was there to offset the other. And now we found out that doesn't work so much. People like Dr. Wade Fowle, Dr. Michael Finke, Dr. David Blanchett, they don't say stocks and bonds anymore. They say stocks and annuities. Why is that? Why do we experience this shift?
The shift happened because of the lack of predictability of the safety portion of the portfolio. The risk side of the portfolio is always going to be vacillating and volatile. And we walk into investing knowing and understanding that maybe not as good as we'll learn as the market ebbs and flows. But the reality is we're trying to create safety when we're in the red zone. We call it the 10 years before retirement here. We need some predictability, for which these bonds is an example of 22. Even 2008 was another great example. They don't provide that. And so we created something that we call buy income and chase alpha. Invest the difference, chasing alpha. And so what happened is manufacturers started to realize they could build these products for predictability and safety and without lack of performance. I think the biggest fear that clients have is because of all the scare tactics that are put out and those that want to protect their asset under management fees. They basically put a lot of fear out there about it, the word annuity. And one particular firm speaks about one annuity with high fees, and it's true that particular annuity has high fees. There's a a reason why those fees exist, because there's some risk associated with those products being issued by the manufacturer. So there are fees that are charged to offset that. But that particular organization talks about annuities as though the A word represents all of them. And I took him on. I created some URLs that took him on, and it caused his brand intelligence attorneys to call me and say, you got to give us our IP back. And I said, when you stop using my IP, I'll give you your IP back. And they said, what are you talking about? And so they got me to the brand marketing folks at this particular firm, and I explained to them there are 42 types of these products, and they're speaking as though the one and only product that they're speaking about, which is clearly in the brochure, is one of 42. And yet I asked the marketing expert, do you know that, are annuities feed or are they not feed? Well, they're always feed. And I said, what if you're wrong? I said, how are annuities taxed? Well, whether it's all ordinary income tax. I said, is there any possibility that an annuity would have different than ordinary income tax? Is there any possibility there could be an annuity with no tax? Well, that's preposterous. I said, no, it's not. What if you're wrong? And I said, let me ask you another question. How many mutual funds are out there? There's thousands. And I said, would you agree with me there's bad ones? Well, of course there are. They're good ones, yes. I said, what about stocks and bonds and ETFs? Would you agree with me there's bad ones? Oh, of course, there's good ones. Yeah, we got them in our portfolio. I said, precisely. You don't bastardize the word stock, bond, mutual fund, and ETFs the way you're bastardizing the word annuity, because there's good ones and there's bad ones. But don't talk about the tool without explaining the difference between the product lines. It's like a screwdriver and a hammer. You would never use a hammer to put a screw in the wall unless you were an idiot. And you would never use the claw of a hammer. You would never use the handle of the screwdriver to put a nail in the wall. You'd use a hammer. And when you need to put a nail in the wall, a hammer's the only job. When you need to put a screw in the wall, a screw is the only job. Well, in the annuity world, there's hammers and pliers and saws and all kinds of different tools, and there's a specific tool for specific jobs, and it complements. It doesn't go against traditional investing, but it complements it with efficiency, tax mitigation, the ability to create inflation adjustment, and reliability and predictability, which is the most important portion of what we used to rely on bonds for. And I'm not saying bonds don't still have a place. All these tools have a place, but you can't bastardize one over another until you understand technically what they each do. And they're just tools.
Curtis, that's so good. I want to use a quick example. Because I structure annuities every single day, I had clients from Virginia call me this week, and they said, hey, and they own fixed index annuities with deferred income riders on them. They're building them for the future to turn them on. And they called me and said, hey, we've got some CDs coming due, and we're not real fond of the rate. It's being renewed at like 3.5. What should we do? I said, what's the purpose of this money? Well, we don't need to turn on income from it. We just want to beat the bank. We want to make maybe somewhere in the 5% range and just have that. If we could find a guarantee where maybe they would do that for, 3, 5, 7 years. I said, stop right there. I already know what we need to do here. And so I sent them some rates for Virginia that explained what current MIGA rates are, multi-year guaranteed annuities. That is an insurance company's version of a CD, only better in my opinion because the rates are normally 1 to 2 points higher. There is no annual 1099. You can compound your interest. Long story short, in their area, we found 3-year, 5-year, and 7-year annuities that range between 5.5 and 5.8%. No 1099, compounded growth, even has liquidity where they can skim interest if they want. They were thrilled, doing a backflip, that they could guarantee 5.8% for 7 years when they think probably bank rates are going to go the other way. Well, as Curtis has been saying on the show, listeners, that's one kind of many, many, many kinds of annuities. There's SPIAs, DIAs, FIAs, variable annuities, QLACs, MIGAs. We could just keep going on and on and on and on and on. You've got to know the products. You've got to be working with someone who's not a salesman, who knows this stuff inside and out. And that's who you're listening to on the show today. Okay, Curtis, I know I first saw you years ago on videos and just watching stuff online. I know you've done a lot of stuff with Tom. You've done stuff with Thrive University, which you may talk about. But I also saw you, I enrolled in the Retirement Income Certified Professional Program with the American College, and I'm taking my classes and studying for exams. And there you are as a guest teacher and sharing information and stuff. And so I thought anyone that's in the American College, it's just such a high level of respect for so many people, such a quality program. And there are people like Dr. Wade Fowle, Dr. Michael Finke, Dr. David Blanchett, who taught us so much about something called income flooring, set the floor. And as they're doing all of that, I'm thinking, where have I heard this before? Oh yeah, Tom Hegna, paychecks and playchecks, making sure that all your discretionary daily, monthly income, your bills, your mortgage, your car payments, it's got to come from something that's guaranteed. And so in 2024 and in 2025, I know that Michael Fink and David Blanchett, both guests on the show, colleagues, good friends, they've talked a lot about this year, the license to spend more. How does an annuity give you a license to spend more in retirement? Explain that.
Well, it's a psychological issue. When people work for 30, 40, 50 years, being taught to stuff money, don't spend, stuff money, don't spend, those particular types of individuals, when they finally get to the day they do retire, can't seem to give themselves permission to turn it on.
Yes.
So Tommy calls it a just-in-case retirement. The whole time they work, they dreamed of buying that boat, those trips, and then they get to retirement and they just can't bring themselves to spend the cash because they want to see that pile. They get that statement every month. They lay it on the fireplace mantle and they adore it, and
Yes.
They just can't bring themselves to bring it down. And so they say, just in case I need that money, I'm not going to spend it. And so they die. And according to the stats in the U.S., it takes about 18 months for the next generation to spend what took a lifetime for their parents to save. And so who actually ends up owning the RV and the boat and going on all those fancy trips is the kids, not the parents. And so the solution to that is delegating and devoting a specified amount of assets to income that you've given yourself permission to cash flow, because it's coming as cash flow. Once you buy it, it's coming to you whether you want it now or not. Now, there's things you can do to mitigate the tax impact on it. You can redeploy and reinvest the money so it's no harm and no foul. But it changes the emotional contrast on that money, where it's coming as cash flow, it's monthly being directed deposit into your bank, and it's easy to spend. And when you get a big discount, what's the magic of annuities for income is if I'm doing a safe withdrawal SWIP, systematic withdrawal with money in the market, I have to pick an opinion. I have to pick a spec of safe withdrawal rates. Now, it used to be we thought 4% was it. That meant that every $40,000 of income, you need to have $1 million held hostage in the market to generate that income. Well, you don't need $1 million for $40,000 of income. You need about $400,000 to buy the income, as long as you do it ahead of time. And if you buy it even sooner, it could be as cheap as $350. The sooner you buy it, the more discounted you buy it. That frees up the remainder of those assets no longer to be held to bonds or safety. I don't have to worry about when I get to the age of retirement and worry about SWIP or systematic withdrawal. That income just turns on, flips it over into my bank account. Every month, another payment comes. That means I can unfetteredly chase alpha with that money. When I'm 60, I can act like I'm 30 all over again, only subject to my risk tolerances. And I'll have more growth assets. I'll have a bigger pile on that statement in my fireplace mantle when I buy income chase alpha than if I try to hoard money in a safe withdrawal rate, constrain it for a safe withdrawal rate. I'll have more money buying income and chasing alpha by using the combination of the annuities for income and fixed interest allocation. You mentioned MIGAs. We do about $100 million of the MIGAs on the books. Every week we have about $500,000 rolling over to the next best rate. It's just something we started doing 30 years ago. That's just one of the 42, but there's so many of these products. And then we also manage the assets in the market. There's a lot of stocks that we follow. There's a lot of strategies that we follow for tax harvesting. And so it's when you can put the two, and I understand, Brad, you got a team where the team specializes in what they do. It just so happens in my practice, I do it all. We manage the portfolios and we manage the fixed income and the annuity selection, but we don't preface one over the other. We do the discovery. We find out what the client's goals are. We find out what their resources are. And then we, based on our knowledge, based on our tax knowledge, based on our economic and efficiency knowledge, we make specific recommendations on every tranche of their portfolio. It takes about an average 8 different investment decisions to build a retirement plan. So I'm going to have stocks in there. I might have mutual funds in there. I might have a variable annuity with a low fee for asset growth with downside protection. I'm going to have maybe a MIGA for dollars that are more short term. And I'm going to have all kinds of income guarantees from products that provide those. FIA, income riders, SPIAs, DIAs, QLACs, all those sorts of things, different reasons for different ones. And so it's not about being preferential. I hate annuities. Well, what premise is that? I hate annuities because I love my assets under management. I don't want you to quit paying my asset under management fee. That's really what it boils down to. And when you're unconflicted, in 1999, after I discovered the value of laddering deferred income annuities versus laddering bonds, that was efficient by almost 40%, less costly to ladder DIAs versus bonds in any interest rate market you ever found. And I realized the reason the product never made the light of day was because they didn't pay a lot of commission. It was a low commission product. I was told by the actuary, this will never take any legs because they don't pay wholesalers to talk about it. And the manufacturer makes less than other products that are more expensive with higher fees. And the advisor makes less. And so it'll never happen. And so I wrote down on my calendar that day, I realized that God created me to be was a ferocious consumer advocate. I wasn't going to believe the industry to tell me the truth. I was going to find out the truth. And then I was going to ferociously go after helping clients figure out what the truth was without a preference to a product or beholden to some compensation level that made me wealthy and made them poor. And that became my mantra. And so I'm telling you, you've got to find honest, ethical, educated advisors who don't have a bias to products, but they're practitioners that drill deep and they drill wide to understand what each and every product tool would provide to them in each tranche and every tax class of their portfolio.
Friends, what you just listened to was solid gold, and that's why I love this man. We're passionate about the exact same things. And so I will say this, I say this a lot. You want to find someone who's a true fiduciary, someone who truly puts your best interest in place. You need to find someone who doesn't need the income from you. Someone can come in and talk to me, and I'm going to tell them, listen, let me relieve the pressure. Whether you become a client of mine or not doesn't matter. I hope you do. I hope we work out and we're a great fit, but I'm not going to not eat today whether or not I make this sell. And a lot of people who are salesmen or in the industry are going to push something to you because they've got to. They've got to sell whatever makes them the most commission or the highest ongoing return on assets under management. They're trying to build it for whatever purpose. You find someone who doesn't need that. They're okay. They're blessed. They're able to truly focus in on you. They're going to take care of you and do what's in your best interest. And so I'm grateful for people like Curtis, who's made it his passion to find out the truth, to share that truth with you, and then to teach you what is best for you based on your own specific situation. Okay, we talk about Tom Hegna a lot on the show. I have his books all over my office. I hand them out to people all the time, and I'm constantly reminding people of the two things that Tom Hegna says are the keys to whether or not you're going to have a successful retirement income plan. And Curtis, I know you know it well. He says these two questions are what matter. How much guaranteed lifetime income do you have, and have you taken the key retirement risks off the table? So Curtis, with you working with so many different consumers, so many different clients, I want to ask you, and what you see in your part of the world, which I believe is Arizona and Iowa, like you fly back and forth a lot between the two, family farm and stuff. What are the key retirement risks that retirees face today? How are these things going to affect them?
The number one retirement risk is running out and not having enough, or misexpectations, too high of a withdrawal risk. So the first, and I talk about 5 fears and I talk about 5 risks. The fears sometimes are real risks. Sometimes the fears are perceptive and not real. And so sometimes there's fears they don't have because they don't even know there's something that could bite them, such as sequence of returns risk. It wasn't an issue in accumulation, but it's bad thing in distribution. So there's 18 risks. I was one of the 42 academics that helped write the curriculum with Wade Pfau and Michael Finca, and Tom Hagna was in the course as well. We all helped write the course. My particular segment, you asked the last segment about retirement income floor, that was my specialty. And we figured out the retirement income floor was established long before I came to the market. But what I figured out how to do was buy that retirement income floor for less dollars. I created tons of efficiency, not just in the mere cost of buying the income, but the mere cost and the taxes to the income, the fee drag, and how to mitigate inflation at the same time. So that's kind of my claim to fame, is making the retirement income floor better. But the risks, there are 18 up, all 42 of us agreed on, and I built a brochure called the 18 Risks of Retirement. Maybe I just go through. The first one is longevity risk, running out, not having enough time. Inflation is the next one. And excess withdrawals. People, don't plan, and then they start living a sloppy retirement, and they start breaking their rules on excess withdrawals. Health expenses, unplanned or planned sometimes. Medications are going up. Med sup premiums are going up. I go to the Advantage plan, and I think I'm going to save all that premium, and then I have medical expenses that take all that money away with my out-of-pocket maximum, my copay. So there's just surprises. Long-term care is another big risk. Market risk, volatility of the market. Didn't expect that to happen right after I retired. Look at people in 2008. They were in despair. Interest rate risk. There's reasons why we buy a product. Maybe we'll buy an FI in one period of time, we'll buy a SPI or D in a different period of time, all driven by interest rates and economies. And so again, you got to talk to an expert about how to do that and not make a buying mistake. Liquidity risk. You've tied too much money up, and now you got a penalty to get it out. And so that's a risk number 10. Forced retirement risk. You lose your job. You didn't plan on it. The company sold all of a sudden. Finally, the family got a buyer that was paying them more than they was willing to keep it for, and so you lost your job. Reemployment risk. Now, you can't get another job. Or how long does it take you to get that job? Employer insolvency risk. Well, there's a different one, right? All related to unexpected financial responsibility risk. We call this the sandwich generation, right? You sent the kids off to college, they're doing great, and all of a sudden the daughter calls you up one day, she's pregnant, she's dropping out of school, and suddenly there's an apartment in your basement. You didn't plan on a baby's being born, and suddenly she doesn't have a job now. The college bills are still coming in. She has no way to pay for it, and you're paying the bill. All while your wife's taking care of her mother, who may have to move in with you as well. It's called the sandwich generation. That's unexpected financial responsibility risk. And timing. Timing for you just sucks, so timing risk is one. And then public policy risk, tax law changes.
Yes.
Rules late. We saw a big one with inherited IRAs. It used to be you could stretch them out forever, and now you got a 10-year window. It changed everything. And so there's public policy risks. Those are the 18 risks of retirement. The top 5 risks are longevity risk, which Tommy talks about. The second one is inflation risk. We all know about inflation. The third one is medical expense risk. That's more inflation than the standard lifestyle need, is inflation on medical and sequence of returns risk. And then the fifth one is making an investment mistake. And we all know that every client that sits across the conference room tables or across the other side of the video camera in a Zoom call with us, we know that even though they picked us out for the meeting, for the discussion, in the back of their mind, they have no idea whether they can trust that face on the other side of the table or the other side of the camera. And their biggest fear is, how do I know I can trust this dude, this gal? How do I know I'm not going to make an investment mistake? You know what? That's an absolutely fair question you should ask every single time until you get a good intuitive sense about the person you're talking to.
Absolutely.
Because it's a real. But making a bad decision off of bad advice, especially when you're locking yourself in, 8, 16 years, I've seen this, there can be some really bad decisions that cause risk associated with retirement for which you cannot recover. And so it's really important that you talk to direct experts that know what it is that they're talking about, like Brad, and you get the right facts. If you're interested in communicating with me and you're an advisor, we have a class, 2-day intensive workshop called Thrive University. Our next one's being held September the 23rd through the 24th in Tampa, Florida. If you want to find out about that class, you can reach out to us at 515-298-4748. And my email is ccloke@thriveincome.com.
And if you are an advisor and you're listening right now and you want to know more about it, I can tell you there is not anyone who knows more about what they're talking about than the person on the show today. So we're going to put that information on the screen where you can see it. If you're a consumer, if you're a financial professional and you want more information, just give us a call. You can contact me. You can contact Curtis. We're so glad to help. And I'll say this. He was just saying something that's so important. 18 different risks. And if you're sitting out there right now saying, oh, but my advisor said I'm good. I'm all covered. I mean, I know all my money's in one bucket. I've got stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and it'll take care of all the risks. Let me just say this very clearly. There's nothing wrong with stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. I have more than 7 figures in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Why do I? Because I also own real estate, because I have all my guaranteed income already purchased. I'm never going to have to worry about my income stream, so I can chase alpha. Just like Curtis has said, I can swing for the fences because I've already bought all my income need. If you're doing all that and you have no guarantees, no long-term care in place, no annuities in place, if Social Security is your only guaranteed income, you have no pensions or annuities, you need to rethink your plan. You need to talk to a financial expert who understands all sides of this. That's why I'm a retirement income certified professional and a tax planning certified professional through the American College. Our number is 866-780-SAFE. Call us anytime, 866-780-7233. We'll be right back with one more segment. Curtis, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Such a great guest, so much incredible information, and the fact that you've worked with and customized the plans for other renowned experts that have been on our show, world-renowned economists like Tom Hegna, authors. You're just a goat in the industry. We're grateful for you. And, this morning before we ever talked, I know we didn't talk about this, but I got up and my good friend who also works with the American College, Don Graves, he's a reverse mortgage specialist. He's put a post on. We talk a lot. He's been on the show a lot. He lists this article this morning from Yahoo Finance. It is fascinating. I had to take 20 minutes and read it and dive into it. Baby boomers now live next to 18-year-olds at colleges, on college campuses across the U.S. And the entire article is about how since the birth boom slowed down in 2008, we're now 17 and 18 years away from that. And guess what's happening on college campuses? There aren't enough people going to college. So colleges are struggling. They're closing all across the country. There's not enough revenue coming in. But guess what's happening on the other end of the spectrum? More and more people are turning 60 and 70 and 80, and they need places to live. And so they are actually doing this fascinating stuff where you have 80-year-olds moving on to college campuses and paying rent and infusing money into the program to take college courses with the kids, and they're cohabitating, they're working out together. Their kids are talking about how great it is to have bonus grandparents and the mentoring and the things that they're eating with them in the cafeteria. It's fascinating what's going on in our world right now. There are fewer people being born. There are more people turning 60, 70, 80. So as we wrap up, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. All these people you talk to all across the country, you're a specialist in so many different areas. What kind of advice do you have for our listeners right now in light of all these things that are going on? What would you say to our listeners regarding where they are in the world today in retirement planning?
But by the way, I know Don Graves intimately. We helped develop some of his programming, and I invited him to speak at a Thrive U in Chicago many years ago, and it's where I learned about the value of reverse mortgages, where I had thought I made my mind up. Changed. Wade Pfau, who you spoke about, has attended not one but 2 Thrive Universities, and a lot of the curriculum he writes about, he gives us credit for his work on retirement income floor. So these folks have been taught by me. They've come to my class, sit under my roof. So having said that, and having asked this question, the one thing that you need to focus on is you need to find a practitioner that is well-versed in both the investment and the insurance world. And you need to know where the efficient collision of collaboration is between those two worlds as it relates to you and your particular situation. And you need to find somebody that's authentic, not driven for themselves, but driven totally for what's in your best interest. And so you don't want to deal with anyone that's a product bias expert who really is good at one thing, but they despise, and there's a hidden agenda as to why they despise these things that you'll never find out. But find a practitioner that understands both sides of that equation and are not afraid to talk to you about mitigating these 18 risks. And you can't mitigate these risks with a stock, bond, mutual fund, or real estate investment trust, or buying real estate. Not saying those are bad investments. You should consider them. I own all of them. I don't have real estate investment trust, but I own real estate, lots of alternative investment in my portfolio. So I believe in all of that, but you have to mitigate lifetime income from the risk side of your retirement plan. And you can't be more efficient. I can take you to task. With our software, I can prove to you over and over again. There's two things. There's two principles that are as true as gravity. What do I mean? A principle is something that's true, and it's true every time. It doesn't matter you believe in gravity or not. You get on a tall building and jump off, and splat's the answer.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
true. It's true. It's true every time. But if you can get your promise-based, so there's promise-based income and risk-based income. On the income side, if you can get your income goal, that amount you want for your standard lifestyle income, if you can get promise-based income between Social Security and pension and what you buy at 80%, that means you're still going to have to get 20% from your risk-based portfolio. If you can get it at 20%, we've done thousands of case studies, you'll never fail. The second principle is if you can stay at or below preferably 3% withdrawal drag against assets in the market, you'll never, ever fail at retirement. And when you have 80% promise-based and you only need 20% more, it's not hard to stay below a 3% withdrawal drag. They're correlated. Those are two things that if you pay attention to, they'll free you up to chase alpha however you want to spot that risk going forward. And those are the two most important things to take away from.
Fantastic. If you would tell our clients again, our listeners, and especially the financial professionals who follow us, who are watching us, how can they find your information?
Yes, you can, again, reach out to our office at 515-298-4748. My email address is my first initial last name, C-C-L-O-K-E at thriveincome.com. You can also find me at curtiscloke.com. You'll see our speaking. I do a lot of international and U.S.-based speaking. I do a lot of teaching, as you've already heard. We have the software, Retirement Next Gen software, and then we have we work with advisors using our software to do pair planning. So if an advisor says that's too hard for me, but I want to do it, I want my clients to have the benefit of it, we have a pair planning service, a retainer model that you can hire us to do. We routinely do about 41 RIA offices where they want to be the expert, we're the numbers and engine behind it. We have a dedicated team in New Jersey. That's all they do Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. And so we've got thousands and thousands of case studies to propagate the information that we share with you on this show. So,
friends, those of you who know my story, you go all the way back and know that in my early days, I was in full-time ministry and I knew absolutely nothing about money. So how in the world am I where I am today? No debt. All these things are going on in my world. And they're like, how did you do that? Well, I learned a long time ago. I met Tom Hegna and I met Ed Slott back in 2008, early 2009. And I thought, I don't have to know it all. I just have to know the people who know it all. And if they don't know anything, they're going to know the people who do. And so I've surrounded myself with people like Curtis and Tom and Ed and Wade and Michael and David, all these experts who are the best of the best of the best at what they do. If you want to work with people who are experts in this, who work with people all across the country, just call us anytime. 866-780-SAFE. That's 866-780-7233. Call anytime, ask for our free information or a free financial consultation. Curtis, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And everyone else, thank you for watching. Have a great week and God bless.